All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. As all of you know who are listening to the show, who've heard the show before, Witchpolice Radio focuses on primarily Winnipeg and Manitoba artists. And every once in a while, I make an exception and have someone on the show who I like to call Manitoba adjacent. And I think that the guest on this episode is someone who is very Manitoba adjacent, despite not really having spent any time here.
Yeah.
But you have a connection. You have a very unusual connection, I think, to this province and to this city. So I think that the best way to start this off is if you want to just give a brief introduction about who you are and what you do, because you're a different kind of guest that I've had on the show regularly.
Sure. Well, hi, Sam. It's great to be with you tonight. My name is Greg, and I am one half of the absolutely insane podcast, Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propagandhi, and which I co-host with one of my bestest buddies, Keith. And on that show, we talk about every single propagandhi song. We're going through the entire discography, and we're almost at episode 60, so we're over halfway done.
Nice.
And it feels awesome. It's been like one of the best things I've ever been able to do creatively in my entire life. It's been challenging and rewarding in countless ways. I've become friends with you, which is a fabulous benefit of the show, and you've been extremely helpful. I also host another podcast called the Classical Ideas Podcast, which is an academic show where I interview professors and journalists and lawyers and teachers about their work when it comes to the field of religious studies, so the academic study of religion. I'm also a high school teacher, and I've taught in Missouri, New York, Mexico, the UK, and I did my master's degree at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. So I have a little bit of Canadian living experience, but none really in Winnipeg. But the fact that I'm so obsessed with propagandhi is, I've been very, very pleased with some of the friendships that I've built in the wonderful city of Winnipeg, which I, in theory, could potentially, possibly, maybe visit in October. But that's a real big if right now. But in theory, I would see propagandhi in October at the Park Theater if all went according to plan. But we know how the world is thinking about human beings and their plans at the moment. So we'll see how it goes,
So I may meet you in person at that show if the world goes according to plan. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And if I was going to come all the way up there, I would definitely meet you before the show, and we could do fun hangout things and go all over the place. So you never know. We'll see what happens. I'm waiting at least another month before I make any firm financial investments.
Of course. So before I have a lot of questions for you about the show and about kind of where it's taking you and everything. But first of all, after doing this much work, because these are long episodes. I mean, my show is maybe 45 to an hour. Yours is often at least an hour more than that, sometimes 2 hours more than that.
Yeah.
And so, like, at this point, is any part of you sick of propagandhi? I mean,
no.
Is it the opposite? Are you just like so much more invested in their songs and in their music than you would have been before?
It's so, Sam, it's really surreal. People ask me all the time, what band are you going to do next? And I think I was chatting with Dwayne Larson, the photographer in Winnipeg, just a little while ago. And he's like, what band are you going to do next? Bad Religion? And I was like, no, there's no way that, like, no other band does this for me. You know what I mean? Like, I cannot see myself doing this amount of effort for any other band on the entire planet.
Yeah.
Because propagandhi, like, cuts me in a certain way that no other band does. And I was just like completely obsessed with doing this project. And doing this project has only made me love the band more, which is shocking. Shocking. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who has thought about propagandhi more in the last year and a half than me.
Yeah.
Except for maybe the band themselves, but I don't even think they have. I think it's been me. And it's been a compulsive, obsessive, driving internal force to where I just feel like this is exactly what I'm supposed to do right now as far as creative output goes.
Yeah.
And I only love the band more. I mean, I was like driving in my car earlier listening to Potemkin City Limits, and I was like, I don't have to listen to this right now, but this is what I want to listen to. So it's an absolute obsession. I love the band more than ever, and I have absolutely zero regrets.
That's awesome. Well, as a listener of your podcast and a lifelong Propagandhi fan since I was like, 14, 15, I feel the same way. The show makes me want to listen to their music deeper and give greater consideration to what they're talking about and why, and also just the musical elements. It's like there's. I think that it wouldn't work with any other band because of the level of complexity, both in terms of subject matter, lyrics, musical complexity. Like it's they have this wealth of content that obviously rewards close listening, which is what you've been doing with your podcast. But also, I think that there's a lot of ways into their stuff if you're not a fan of punk rock or hardcore or metal or thrash or whatever genres you want to include in their sound. I think that because of what they're talking about and the level of like they don't dumb it down, they don't beat you over the head with it. It's very as you know, right? I mean, it's very detailed and thoughtful and educational and thought-provoking.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like whenever I start diving into a song, I always am looking for what like current events news articles were coming out around the time that maybe inspired the songs to be written. And just diving into the sheer amount of resources that I find based on the events described within a song and the concepts that we talk about and the vocabulary that we go through and the world events that the songs are about. Sometimes I wind up finding 30 or 40 source materials for a single song, and it becomes this beast. Do you know what I mean? And like people have complained in the past that the show is so long, but all I do is follow the story. So if I find a thread to pull on a song, I'm going to pull every single thread, no matter what, because then what happens is I reduce the amount of times where people come back and say, oh, you missed this, and this was really good, but you missed this. And then that makes me feel badly because I really do want the show to be thorough and in depth. But like, I'm amazed by the amount of resources that we constantly are finding. It's truly mind blowing. And you know what I mean? Like earlier you said no other band really would be like this. Like, I don't know if I totally agree. Like I am all for niche content.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I know you are too. And like, if somebody loves a band as much as I love Propagandhi, then I would love for other people to do song by song podcasts. Like I go on Twitter all the time and I like beg people, somebody do a Dillinger 4 song by song podcast, please. People are always like, Greg, do the strung out one. I'm like, no, somebody else do the strung out one because I want to listen to it.
For sure.
You know what I mean? So this is like this is the one that I had to do. And I could not be more thrilled with how it's gone, but I just love it, man. Love it.
Well, after listening to so much of your show, I've definitely if I had more time, I would be doing a Bad Brains one, like, just or Fishbone or someone like that I'm really obsessed with. But someone out there will do it. There'll be a Bad Brains one somewhere that someone's doing, and I'll listen to it and complain about every episode and tell them this and that, and just like people do with you, right? I mean, you get tons of feedback from super fans.
It's amazing. I mean, the greatest thing about it has been the friendships. Seriously, like this past year and a half has been so lonely for so many people in our world that to have a small place where we can have a positive engagement with people online, give people something. Like people are like, oh, I look forward to the show. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this actually is working for people and that people are getting something out of it and that we're helping. Like people tell me fairly regularly that the episodes are helping them get through this, like a very dark period of life. And it like touches my heart every single time I hear it because I know how like long I spend on these things, and to get any messages like that in return is just so thrilling, and it just makes me feel very emotional, very humble, very honored, very privileged, and extremely happy that we've been able to create this positive space online for people to check out if they want to.
When you've had, I think at this point you've had everyone from the band on the show, right? At one point or
not
another?
John K. Sampson,
right? But from the current incarnation, you've had all of them on. Some of them more than once.
Oh yeah.
What's their take on it? Just because, I mean, a lot of these songs, like we've been talking about, they cover, big picture issues, and a lot of them cover, some will cover very, very small niche issues, but they're very detailed. But then some of them are personal. There's a lot of content in some of these songs that is obviously written from a personal point of view.
Yeah.
Has anyone in the band said anything about the experience of hearing something like that get deconstructed over 2.5 hours?
Not precisely. So we definitely kind of had a moment on the Rock for Sustainable Capitalism episode, which kind of went sideways. Because first of all, we botched the Billy Bragg information on the episode where we were talking about the Lars Fredriksson to have and have not. And we didn't we didn't acknowledge there's a Billy Bragg cover. So we got like over 200 emails about the fact that we didn't acknowledge that it was Billy Bragg. So we totally screwed it up. And so that was a tough one. But also there was some commentary from the guest on the episode where and then Chris Hanna responded to that. So that was a really interesting experience. But we have been so fortunate that the band digs the show. I don't think they listen to it because we're talking about them, and who the heck wants to listen to somebody talk about you? It's like the biggest like ego thing ever if they're like, oh, I'm going to listen to this thing about me, you know what I mean? So like, I don't expect them to listen to it at all, but the fact that they're like supportive and interested in the fact that it exists, and like they're not like angry at us, because like I didn't ask them to do this. I did this sort of like, hey, I wonder if this will work, just as like a sanity project. And Chris has been on, Todd and his brother came on one episode, Sue Lynn has been on several times. Beeve has been on several times. Jord, I punished Jord for like an hour and a half with the most fun and hilarious conversation. And we had such a good time. So I'm like just truly beyond grateful to them, because if you think about me finding this band in like the mid 90s, and the fact that I've been so obsessed with them for so long, and now I get to like hang out with them, like, and ask them questions that genuinely interest me. I can't imagine, like, it's just so unfathomable to believe that this is actually happening right now. I'm so grateful, endlessly grateful to them for not being mad at us for doing this, because it really, these things are very sensitive. Talking about one's life in a song and then having some yahoos that you've never met deconstruct it is a real challenging thing to consider. So I'm so fortunate that they seem to like what we're doing,
Yeah. Well, I guess, like, I mean, part of the reason I think people like it is because you are both obviously huge fans of the band. I think that there's no sense that you're just kind of trying to come across as experts on it. You're legitimately curious what other people what your guests have to say about the songs. And often, I've heard most of the episodes by now. I still have a few to catch up on, mainly because of the length. But, but like, I think people who you have on the show, it's very clear that you learn new things from them. And you learn new things from their interpretations of the songs. And, even from some of the lyrics you heard 20, 30, 40, 50 times, when you're deconstructing it, I've heard both of you kind of realize things as you're recording about the songs that is kind of a new revelation, which is cool to hear in real time, right? It's much better than having kind of a sanitized, like very, very dictated script about it. I mean, I know you work on this ahead of time, you do the research, but the fact that you're having a conversation as two just nerds about it and nerding out together, I think it's really part of the appeal.
Yeah, like the real-time epiphanies, like when they happen for me on the show, I mean, I walk away from those conversations with Keith or with a guest, just like feeling like a different person. You know what I mean? Like I can feel myself have revelations about the world in real time. And that's something that I really cherish about the experience of being human, is pushing myself with each passing year to not be a totally complacent person who doesn't seek to learn new things. Like I love learning. And that's why I love doing the show so much, is because I always feel like I walk away with like something that I've learned new things and that I've had new thoughts and that my brain is continuing to like do its job. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is what I feel like the meaning of life is just to be curious about things. And so the fact that I can do this with this conversations about my favorite music ever written, I get something new out of it every week. And like some of the episodes that I've like really had some like real-time epiphanies would be things like Last Will and Testament, where I can like reflect deeply upon the passing of my grandparents and like how much that impacted me. But it took me years to process that stuff. And talking about that kind of stuff, which is very painful on the inside of me, and being able to express those things honestly on the show in connection to somebody else's music. I mean, I walk away feeling completely rejuvenated from those kinds of experiences. And it's just been so important for me this past year to be able to have those experiences with Keith.
What did your previous show? I mean, I know you have the other show you were doing. You started that before this, right? Did that kind of get you geared up to do this in terms of just the process of making a podcast and doing interviews and that kind of thing?
Oh my God. So the other show is like, so it's the show that I started podcasting with. It's called Classical Ideas. It's all academic and it's all about the religions of the world. So like, I'll talk about anything from like Sikhism to Muslim fashion to Zen Buddhism to like anything, like any topic. Nothing is off limits.
Yeah.
And on that show, I figured out how to edit audio. I figured out how to record interviews online. I figured out how to get in contact with publicists and authors about their books.
Yeah.
And I figured out how to structure and lead interviews. And all of this is totally self-taught. Like my students in my classroom wanted to do a podcast for our classroom. And so I did it as like a classroom project with my students in Missouri. Okay. And so doing all those things showed me all the screw ups that is hard about podcasting. So it was a very clunky beginning, very challenging. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was really just learning in real time and like flailing myself into figuring out how to get it to show up on Spotify and Apple. Like that's really what the goal was. And without those experiences, and without, how many was it? I must have done at least 160 episodes of that podcast before I did one of the Propagandhi ones. Okay. So I felt really confident that we could hit the ground running hard on the Propagandhi podcast because I knew how to edit. I knew how to record interviews. I knew how to publish things. I knew what to do to get artwork, and I knew what the dimensions of the artwork had to be and things like that. So I really knew a lot because Keith didn't know anything about podcasting. I literally drugged this stranger off the internet into being my co-host just because I had a good feeling that it was going to be a good fit. And I mean, I'm so lucky that it worked out, but like without those previous experiences of doing the other show, this one, I never would have had any idea how to do this. And the episodes would not have been nearly as ambitious as they turned out to be. Like right now, I'm like 3.5 hour episode. Screw it. If I got the content and like, if it's fun and like, and it's interesting and we had things to say, I don't care how long the episode is. And I know how to structure them and make them flow now because of the first show. So like, it's just like a series of events leading to the creation of this one. And my other show is still going. Like I have, I've been recording interviews for the other show all week long. But this one has become my complete obsession. And I'm okay with that.
What is your, just to sort of shift gears here, what has your experience been what is your understanding, I guess, of Winnipeg over the course of doing this? Because I got it's a Winnipeg podcast. I have to talk about the city.
Sure.
And as you haven't been there, but you've met so many people from the city on your podcast and just online. And you've heard all these songs that reference very specific local things. And I'm sure you have done research on a lot of this stuff related to specific songs. What is your impression of it? Like, I know you want to go here, obviously, if you can for that show, but what are you expecting, I guess, if and when you do make a visit here?
So I used to live in Saskatoon, so I'm familiar with the cold, like the real cold.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't get really cold in Buffalo. Like usually it's like, right around freezing.
Sure.
But we just get a lot of snow. But when I was in Saskatoon, I mean, there was one winter I was there where it was basically minus 30 for the whole, or colder for the whole month of January. It was a really interesting experience for me. And I learned many new things like cross country skiing. I think I went to like somebody's ice fishing shack a couple of times up on Tobin Lake up in northern Saskatchewan by Prince Albert. And there was a lot of new experiences and cultural things that I was able to try that really expanded a lot of, my appreciation for wintry things.
Yeah.
So I get the impression that Winnipeg and Saskatoon might be kind of like culturally similar, where there's like, whenever the thaw happens in the springtime, it's like just dirt everywhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And massive potholes and everybody joking around about that. Canadian tire bucks and things like that. But for the most part, I get the impression that the people are extremely kind. Like people in Saskatoon were very enthusiastic about their city, and they were so cool about showing it to me because, I'm a guy from St. Louis, Missouri, wind up living in Saskatoon. That's pretty unlikely. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I get the impression that people in Winnipeg are extremely enthusiastic about the city because so many people who have been on the show are from Winnipeg, and they tell me about Randy Frickus was telling me about his buddy who runs the brewery over there. The name is escaping me, but it starts with an S. Yeah.
It's a beer store.
Yeah. And then like learning about Randy's filmmaking and the Royal Albert documentary that he made, and, talking to Dylan and Randy and Clipwing, and like learning about Mobina Galore and all these fantastic things that you've done, learning about the history of Whole Lotta Milka. I mean, there's so much fantastic arts and culture in the town from what I can tell. And I know that when I wind up there, that I have like people there who were like excited, that would actually be thrilled to hang out and show me cool stuff for days. And so I know that like when I wind up there on a trip, I'm only going to get like the coolest experience because so many people are so thrilled by the town that I know that it'll just be a wonderful experience, and I will walk away having grown a little bit more as a person. So that's like kind of that's my impression of the town so far.
I like that impression. It's a very optimistic one. I think that the reason I asked that question is because the thing about Winnipeg, I find, and I was actually on this show. It's not out yet, but it was this TV show in Quebec, and they came to Winnipeg and they were talking about the punk scene and music, and I was one of the guests on their show.
Yeah.
And one of the things that kind of came up in the conversation there was about our opinion of ourselves, where we can talk as much shit as we want about the city, but the second anyone else says anything even remotely critical, it's like knives out, like we're ready to, it's gonna be a fight. And so the reason I asked, like, Winnipeg handshake, you crack a ball on the thing and stab it. But like, is there any concern about that? Not getting stabbed or anything, but in the sense that you're talking about this city where people are very passionate about, especially when it comes to outsiders, putting their opinions on us. And I think the reason that is because we're fairly isolated. It's often the butt of a lot of jokes by bigger cities because we're cold, we're in the middle of the nowhere, we have the reputation for mosquitoes and crime and everything else, right? So I think that we are like, it's like a badge of honor. Oh, I live in Winnipeg. And so if anyone else, let alone from somewhere else in Canada, but you're from the States, I mean, that's even worse, right?
I know,
is there any concern about misrepresenting something in Winnipeg and getting a backlash?
Oh, not at all, because my default stance is to listen to people's life stories from their perspective, how they wish to tell them. Doing a couple of podcasts like this and being a high school teacher, the life stories of other people matter a lot to me. And so what I try to do is I just want to listen to people's stories. You know what I mean? Like I was really inspired by like Terry Gross on NPR and like Anthony Bourdain and like people who like go to places where people are from and seek to just like listen and learn. So open eyes, open ears, open hearts. And I know that I talk a lot on a podcast, so that might seem a little ironic, but like I deeply value hearing other people's stories. So while I am talking a lot, like the reason why we have a guest on every show is because I want to hear if their experiences, I want to hear what their experiences are with this kind of music and how it sits inside of them and how it speaks to them and moves them. So like, that's why we have guests on every show, because I want to know what other people's stories are in relation to this band. And so like, if I were to go to Winnipeg, like I would just want to hear everybody's stories about like, tell me about your freaking high school, you know, tell me about the rink that you like to go to. Like, tell me like if your family is from other parts of the province that like I may never see, you know what I mean? That's kind of what I seek to do when I go new places. I just want to hear stories, man. Just tell me all the good stories and I'm going to be happy as a clam.
Well, and in this context, that's background for your show too, right? Because you're getting a better picture, or from more sources, at least, a picture of where this band that you love is coming from, and the community that they grew up in, that they're in now.
Yeah, and you know, and like, what's really, I went through the show episodes recently, and I was counting how many people from Canada had been on the show as far as guests go.
About that.
Yeah, and it's like something like 60% of all of the guests, maybe even more, maybe 65, 70-ish%. I have to do the numbers, but it's a substantial portion of the guests on the show have been from Canada. And so that's a huge thing for me, because being from the States, we had our impression of Propagandhi being like this fat records band that got popular in the 90s. So like I come at this band from a totally different perspective than somebody who may have seen them at the Albert in 92, like Conrad Sichler, who was in Toothpick Hercules. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so my experiences of this band are totally framed within the Midwestern American context in which I grew up. But hearing other people who like saw them a long time ago, or who grew up in Winnipeg, like Beeve grew up as just a fan of the band, who wound up becoming a member of the band. And, you know, Todd was into the band before he joined, when he was in I Spy. So like, I just love hearing people's stories about why the band matters so much. And that's kind of what I seek to do in every single interview. And I really, really, really do seek out and value Canadian guests who can give me a different perspective on this band, because I was listening to it in the context of Fat Records, and so many people in Canada were not. It's a massive difference in the way that the band is understood and appreciated, which is something I've really tried to drill down on during the course of the show.
Well, I think that's something that a lot of us didn't even know that they were being perceived like that. Because I remember seeing some stuff you posted a while ago, and it was, oh, here's a copy of, with supporting cast or whatever record it was, and there's a Fat logo on it.
Yeah.
And like, I'm like, I look at my copy, like, mine wasn't put up by Fat Records. What the hell's going on here? This is.
I think it was Today's Empires. Yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Whichever one. Yeah, it was Today's Empires, right? And so, like, I mean, I bought that when it came out at the Mondragon, which no longer exists, but it was like a vegan cafe and bookstore, and had all this weird anarchist stuff in the back.
I interviewed Paul Burrows. Haven't put it out yet, but it's recorded.
So I mean, like, that's where I got it, and it was very much on a local label and all this stuff. So I think that my perception of that record is obviously going to be different from yours.
Totally.
First of all, in a different country, but also seeing it on this big V punk rock label of the 90s, right? So it's
exactly.
Even the framing is different. So it's kind of a cool way to find out, because everyone you talk to, depending on where they're from and when they got into the band and what their relationship with the band's music is, they're going to have a different entry point. And I think that changes your perception of what they are and what they're about and who they are.
And that's why the story matters. And that's why I get guests, because everybody's story is a little different and it's never boring to me. So even though a lot of guests say similar things like, oh, I found it on the Fat Records compilation and Nation States was the first song I ever heard. And there are some repetitive things that get said on the show, but it's never boring to me. And like, that is an interesting observation to me. Like, why am I never bored by hearing that Nation States was the first song somebody ever heard on the Fat Wreck compilation? I've heard it 20 plus times now, but it just doesn't bore me. Like, I just want to know why people like this freaking band as much as me, you know?
Yeah. That's where I heard them first too, is that song and that comp.
There you go.
And then it said Winnipeg in the liner notes, and I was like, what the hell? This is, and then it's like, oh, this is local. This is I can get this from here where I am. Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. So that's what that I just love hearing the stories. That's why we do it.
I don't want to do something as cliche as making you pick your top 5 propaganda songs, because I imagine that's too difficult for you to choose, especially at this point when you haven't done the full 3-hour deconstruction of all of the songs.
Dude, I can do my favorite song off every record spontaneously if you want me to.
Let's hear it. I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
Okay, so my favorite one on Victory Lap, if I had to choose right now.
Oh, we're going in reverse chronological order.
Let's go reverse. Okay. Is Cop Just Out of Frame. So that's my first pick. I'm not even thinking about these either. I'm just looking at the list.
Okay.
Failed States, hands down, my favorite song on Failed States is Devil's Creek.
Great song.
We haven't done that one yet, but I do have a cover and an interview recorded for Devil's Creek, so I'm real stoked about that one. I've been procrastinating making the actual episode because I just want to make sure I don't screw it up. A lot of these songs really scare the living heck out of me to actually make them.
Sure.
So then my favorite song on supporting cast is... Man, I guess I'm going to go with supporting cast because it has my favorite moment of any Propagandhi song ever when Chris goes, yes. And then it goes into that really ripping riff at about 150 into the song. That's my favorite moment on any Propagandhi song ever recorded in the entire discography. So I got to go with supporting cast. And then let's go back to Potemkin City Limits here. And I'm going to go... My current favorite song on Potemkin City Limits is Cut Into the Earth.
Okay.
I think that it is the most impressively performed Propagandhi recorded song, possibly in the entire catalog, because the performance is so unbelievably good to me and so diverse in the range of sounds that I'm going with Cut Into the Earth from Potemkin. We'll go with Today's Empires now. So let's see this. I think I'm going to go with, off the top of my head, oh, dang. Maybe Albright Monument Baghdad for right now.
Okay. Interesting choice. Yeah.
And then Let's Talk. We will go with Resisting Tyrannical Government. And
it's on my list also. Yeah.
Dude, love that song so much. And then How to Clean Everything. I think that I'm going to go with, oh boy. Probably it's either going to be Who Will Help Me Bake This Bread or Middle Finger Response. So those are my, I can't really, those two for some reason are just both jumping out of me. So that's my list.
Well, the thing I like about that is, aside from Resisting Tyrannical Government, if I was to make a list, it would be all different songs, which I think is kind of the best thing about that band, is that there aren't bad songs on any of the records. So no matter what you choose, it's going to be a great list.
Dude, totally. And ask me again in a week and I would pick totally different songs. These are just the ones that are really grooving with me. Like today, right now, at this very second on August 16th.
Yeah. Well, obviously, they're going to continue recording and continue putting out more music, which is great for everyone. But
hope so.
What happens if they put out a record and you just hate it? Like, it seems unlikely, but how does that impact your kind of hardcore Propagandhi fandom if something just falls flat with you?
So check this out. I loved Failed States so much that, okay, so check this out though. I didn't love Failed States because I didn't think it was nearly as good as supporting cast, but then I saw them live on the Failed States tour and they opened up with Note to Self.
Cool.
And I was like, okay, now I get it. Right. And something that happened is when they put out Victory Lap, I haven't seen Propagandhi live since the Failed States tour. So I have not seen them live since Victory Lap has come out. And it took me until we started the podcast to really love Victory Lap. It did not click with me because I just wanted to be bashed over the head like supporting cast and Failed States. And Victory Lap did not do that.
That's more subtle
bash me over the head. Completely. So what's so crazy about Victory Lap is like, I was like, this is easily their worst record. And I held that opinion for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then we start digging into these songs on this podcast. And I'm like, I completely had this wrong. I was 100% wrong on Victory Lap. And so like, I've found myself changing my mind in real time when it comes to how I feel about their records. But Victory Lap has been hands down the most radically altered record for how I feel about it since we started doing the show.
That I had the same experience with Potemkin City Limits. And I think a lot of people had that with that record.
Yeah, for sure.
Because,
Me too.
Because Less Talk was like, not Less Talk, Today's Empires was just such a like boot to the face of just like wall to wall rock, right? And then
yes,
this one was more subtle too, and it was a little bit different sonically and everything. And it took me a while, and now it's one of my favorites. But it again took me years to really dig into it and understand why it's so good.
Yeah, you know, and I love Chris's songs on Potemkin City Limits, and Todd's songs took me a long time to understand what he was doing on Potemkin. So, like, I absolutely loved half of the record by Chris, and I was really confused by the other half of the record, which was Todd. So I found myself only listening to the Chris songs for years off Potemkin because they were so easy to like.
Sure.
And Todd's songs made me work for it. And in 2005, I mean, I was only 22 years old. So like, I wasn't ready to like think super hard about like the emotional nuance behind a lot of this music. I didn't really understand these songs. Like, I feel like I'm really, you know, kind of like now starting to appreciate the depth and complexity of what was happening. But I was like a total moron, loving this band for years and years, but just like not getting like the depth of it all. And so Potemkin City Limits, I mean, really became a super important record for me in the not too distant past, because I just wasn't smart enough to understand what the heck was happening to me. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, for sure. It's a similar experience with me. And I think that maybe one of the best things about them being, you know, I'm a couple of years older than you and they're maybe a decade older than me, is that a lot of the stuff that they've gone through in making these records, we're sort of catching up on now.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like even the being parents and all these things like that come out in the music, it has to, right? It's part of their lives. It comes through in the records and all that stuff. You kind of go back a few years and it's like, oh, I get where he's coming from. Not completely, but there's things you can relate to differently when you were 18 to when you're 35, 36, 40, whatever, right?
Oh, dude, totally. Last Will and Testament on Supporting Cast. I hated that song for years.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, this is so boring. Oh, there's no melody to the song. But then like my grandparents died and I watched that experience of how that happened and the pain behind all of that. And I was like, and then I listened to that song and I was just like a log jam broke within me. And so like certain experiences break me open to new songs in ways that I had not been able to connect with them before. But then you look at something like Less Talk, More Rock, and those songs only get more relevant with each passing year, which is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it's so disturbing. Yeah.
They only get more relevant. I'm like, okay, well, this is crazy because like they totally told us this was all going to happen. And here we go. So it's like, you know, what are you guys, like prophetic or something? It's wild.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, obviously, this is clearly your favorite band. It's a band you've spent so much time listening to and analyzing and deconstructing. Where do you think, you know, if you had kind of your way, they should be as a band in terms of recognition and success? Because obviously it's not the kind of band that's going to make it to the mainstream because of the style of the music they play. It's aggressive, it's abrasive, it's not pop music, right? I mean, it has pop elements sometimes, but it's definitely not radio friendly a lot of the time as well. But where would you kind of like to see them in terms of success? I know they have this following, a very dedicated following worldwide. And I mean, you can see it in videos of them playing shows in random countries and everyone's singing along, whether they speak English or not. Yeah. And like there's this cult around them. But do you think that they should have more recognition than they do? Or are they right in the right spot for a band of this type?
Well, that's really hard to know for me because I don't look at their like finances. So I don't know like how they're doing monetarily with the band. And like, you know, we're programmed from a young age to associate money with success and other crap like that. So I don't really know how they do as like a financial thing.
Yeah. I don't mean that. I mean, just in terms of like the amount of recognition they get, because like, they should be, they're well known within certain circles, right? But I don't know, like, should they be better known, or is that kind of counterproductive to what they're trying to do?
Man, I like whenever I think about it, like where would I want to see Propagandhi? Like I want to see Propagandhi playing uh shows with other bands. Like I think that Propagandhi could really do awesome stuff if they were playing on tours with like Mastodon or Torch
Okay.
or bands like that, like Faith No More. Like I think that there would be like a massive interest in this band for a certain kind of like Baroness bands like
Yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah.
Um, and I don't really know that I've seen that happen a whole heck of a lot with this band. But like then what you have to do is then you have to like open for other people, and like they have like enough people that love them and want to see like full shows that like I don't know if that totally makes sense for them, but they have such interesting and particular views on where they'll play, how
Yeah.
they'll go through with shows, and what kind of festivals they will and won't play. And that's been something that's been so interesting to learn about, as well as like how they carry themselves. But I think that Chris and Jord should be far more recognized in the wider world of hard rock
Hmm.
for the absolutely incredible contributions to musical performance that they have both done.
For
And
sure.
you talk to people from multiple genres, right? You talk to John Darnielle from the Mountain Goats. You talk to Kyle Shutt from the Sword. You talk to these bands that are outside of the 90s Fat Wreck world that love Propagandhi,
Hmm.
that play totally different kinds of music, but recognize Chris and Jord as being absolute musical powerhouses who, and you're like, wow, really important people really do appreciate what this band has done for music. And, they're not in like magazines like the top 50 guitar players of all time, but in my brain, they
Sure.
they they are. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
Like
I
to me,
get.
Jord is that good and
Oh,
Chris
for
is
real,
that
yeah,
good.
for sure they are. Yeah, all of them. But I guess the reason that I thought of that question is because as you know, they sold out the show in Winnipeg in like 2 seconds, and
Yeah.
they always do. And this has been kind of the reason I have only seen them a handful of times, despite living in the same city as them, dating back to the '90s, is because it always sells out immediately. And every time it
Yeah.
sells out, you have people complaining, that they didn't get tickets. I've been among them, and saying like, well, I often hear, why don't they play a bigger venue? Why don't they play like, and I almost feel like they don't fit in a bigger venue. Like
Right.
to playing somewhere like the Park Theater, which is really going to be in October, it's not a huge venue by any stretch, but it would seem weird seeing them at like the arena or something because it just. I'm sure they could pull it off, but it seems like just a bizarre setting for them to be
Yeah.
outside of kind of a club or a theater sort of
I mean,
venue.
and this is a band that for the entire length of their existence has really stayed consistent in their message
Yeah,
and their lessons, and like they've really just put their like actions behind their words in a way that you don't often see. And they haven't chased financial glory in ways that they probably could have had they
sure.
continued on playing stuff like they were doing on How to Clean Everything, which was an insanely popular record. And they continued to push themselves instead of, pigeonholing themselves into one thing. And so honestly, they could have been and one of those breakout bands in 94.
Yeah,
But the fact that they continued to, you know, go their own sound kept them from like really exploding maybe, but also kept them as a band that continued to push themselves musically, which is far more interesting
oh
in the
yeah,
long run, far more interesting. And, there's a lot of bands that I loved back then a whole lot alongside Propagandhi that I haven't listened to a single song of theirs in decades at this
yeah.
point.
Same here. Most of the Fat Record stuff that I loved back then, that I would have listened to at the same time as and heard on the same comps as and stuff. Yeah, I couldn't tell you the last time I listened to Storm Out or No Use for a Name or any of those bands, and I loved them and they have great songs. But good riddance to any of those bands. I saw them live. Like I enjoyed their music a lot, but it hasn't held up. And I think it's because a lot of those bands, not to criticize them because they put out a lot of great music, but they kind of found a sound and stuck with it. Whereas Propagandhi has continually shifted and changed and somehow gotten better with age, which is bizarre because usually a punk band that doesn't happen. They just kind of either decline or get stuck in a rut and just do the same thing.
I am going to challenge you though on your
Okay.
strung out assertion there, because I disagree, because I think
Okay.
strung out has been a not quite at the same level of like massive like propaganda for me, but strung out I think has continued to grow pretty well, and I'm actually a massive fan of.
Well, to be fair, I haven't listened
It.
to them since like 2000. So
Yeah.
I just lost interest generally in that sound. So I'm sure if I went back and listened to it, I maybe would see what you're talking about. But I use them as an example. But yeah, that's I'm glad to hear that they've also kind of
you should check out Exile and Oblivion. It is a real good record.
Cool. Maybe I will. Yeah. We'll see how much. I have so much to listen to, but I will write that one down. And
it's crazy.
Yeah. So I guess like before we wrap this up, what's the best way for people to find out what you're doing? Because I know like people can subscribe to the show, and that's the best way to get all the new episodes as they come out. But you're very active online, and I feel I feel like whenever you're obviously searching for certain terms on Twitter and jumping in conversations, and that seems to be how you've kind of built your conversations about the band. But where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and Instagram for the show. The handle is Propagandhi Pod. And I end each day of my week by going on Twitter and just searching the word propaganda in the search bar on Twitter and going through. And a lot of times people, I try to assess the context in which they're referring to the band, because I don't want to like a tweet that like refers to something where it like, in my view, misrepresents or misinterprets the message of the band.
Sure.
So I don't like all of them, because I think some people get it really weirdly wrong.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion, right? Like people can interpret this band however they want. But like then I go through and I just like a bunch of tweets and I'm like, hey, what's up? Here we are. And I've found a lot of people that way. And I don't really do that on Instagram. But we're on Instagram and Twitter at Propagandhi Pod. It's on Spotify. All you got to do is search Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propagandhi, and it'll pop right up. It's on Apple.
Nice and short name you got there, right?
Yeah. Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propagandhi. And like, I actually shortened the Twitter,
I noticed
the title to just a podcast about propagandhi. So my Twitter title used to be Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propagandhi. And what happens is it doesn't really show up as well whenever I go through and like people's tweets, because they see Unscripted Moments first, right, and they don't associate with propagandhi. So then I just put a podcast about propagandhi. And then like I was like, oh, way more people find the show when I shortened the title on our Twitter bio. So that was kind of something that I toyed around with. But the show is very much called Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propagandhi in the full duration of it. But we have a good time with it.
Have you ever thought about taking all of this content you have and turning it into something else? I mean, could this become a book, like an oral history kind of thing? I was just thinking about how many people you've talked to that either know the band or are diehard fans of their music or have interacted with their music in some way. And you have hours and hours and hours. It would take a long time, obviously, to edit all that and find the important bits, but you have so much content about so many songs and so many records. Like, is this possible to, once you're done the full discography, to turn it into something more?
Maybe I'll ask Sheldon Burney how he did it with his oral history of Winnipeg underground rock.
It's a great book,
Missing Like Teeth, which I friggin' love. I've read it and loved it. I don't know how that would go, because so much of the show to me is the full immersion where I constantly am weaving in musical clips and live performances and demo versions and things like that. And part of me is, it kind of sucks that the show is only available to a certain kind of experience, because like a lot of people have been like, hey, will you post the videos of your interviews? And I'm like,
that was my next question. Yeah.
Because I never asked permission from the guests to do that. I mean, I think I have the interview videos automatically recorded if people turned on their cameras.
Right.
But like, it really is unfortunate because, like, first of all, the first thing that I think about is that my brother is deaf and I have a show where you can only listen to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like I am excluding populations of people by only having the show in one format, which makes me not feel great, to be perfectly honest with you. So maybe there's a way that I could, like, broaden the access to it. I don't really know. So if anybody out there is listening and has any ideas, I am 100% open to things like that. It's just that the show is, so we have like 58 episodes right now and like 9 more bonus episodes.
Right.
And it's hundreds of hours.
It's
like
a lot. Yeah.
Hundreds. Like I don't have any idea how I would be successful in boiling all of that down, but I am definitely open to ideas. If any Propagandhi super fans out there have like a vision for how we could transfer some of this content to make it accessible to different styles of learners, different styles of like people who intake information in different like learning modalities, I'm open to it, but I don't have any personal ideas off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, like you said, there's hundreds and hundreds of hours. I think that's the first obstacle to figure out is how you would even start with something like that. But I mean, the good thing is that it's saved, it's online, people can listen to it, it's there for posterity, and so it's I think it's a good resource. I wish that more bands had this, like you said at the beginning, because it'd be nice to sort of get into a new band and then suddenly there's this just massive archive of info about them.
I mean, there's a new one that just came out, there's a Leftover Crack podcast that just came out, which I've been enjoying. It's Brad Logan, who plays guitar in Leftover Crack, is one of the hosts of the show.
Oh, cool.
So that one's kind of cool. I used to listen to the Blink 155 podcast several years back. I like the As You Were podcast about Alkaline Trio. I like the Brendan Kelly discography podcast, The Road to the Skeleton Coast. I love the Canadian hosted Last Believer, a podcast about good riddance. Okay. Those fellows are making an amazing show. There is a No Means No song by song podcast called No Means No Thing. Love that show. They're doing real good stuff over there. So I'm really excited about this kind of show. I'm really excited about super niche, totally insanely geeky content. That is the thing that makes me extremely happy about what the internet can offer. And that's why we try to do something positive for, around this band, because like so much of the internet is an absolute hellhole. I just went to I went to a major journalism news source right before I got on the phone with you here. And every headline was an absolute catastrophe that is happening somewhere in the world. And I'm like, I need to read all of these because I need to understand these events. But I also am like I want to keep what I put into the world as positive as I can. And this is one of those ways that I try to do that, because otherwise I think I'll lose it and I'll go crazy.